Hi, this is Christine, your relationship and mindset master doctor and leverage for change. Today I want to speak about the dismissive avoidant and the fearful avoidant and the little differences that's there between both attachment styles. So the dismissive avoidant, as I mentioned before, is usually the sense that you get when you meet a dismissive avoidant is that distancing. There's something like almost like there's always a barrier between you. It's as if there's a barrier beyond which you cannot go beyond, right? There's always kind of like a invisible barrier is what I would call it. And these individuals grew up with an inconsistency of emotional attachment to their caregivers. There were times when the caregivers would take care of them, they would be there for them, and there are other times when they just would not be there. And this could happen if it was a single mother and the mother had to work and she had several children, and then she comes home and there maybe she has to take care of 4 or 3 or whatever children. She won't have time for that because she has to look after food and take care of each child, maybe clean the house, and then she spends a lot of time working. Maybe sometimes she might work more than one job. So the child is always, when she's there, of course, she's available. She tries to be there with them, but there are times when she just cannot. And so that inconsistency led to a child not being able to depend on that caregiver to be there for them when they need them. This could also happen with when one person is really, really close and loving and warm, and another caregiver is really cold and distant. And so there's an inconsistency in that emotional connection as well. And this happens for both the dismissive and the fearful avoidant. Now, the fearful avoidant will have a little bit more difficulty in terms of this person will have grown up in a household that maybe the parents or the caregivers were drug addicts, maybe one or both of them, and it's even worse when it's both, because then that child has to end up taking care, being the parent almost for those parents, because most of the time they were drugged out and laying up in the house, or just drugged up and can't function as parents, or they may have had some mental illness, and so they maybe they were narcissists and only cared for themselves, and so the child had to really be the one taking care of, maybe they had younger siblings, and so that child did not, he or she just learned that they had to give, and so they could not, the relationship with their parents became so enmeshed, because it's like they had to care for their parents or the caregivers, and it was a one-sided kind of a thing. He or she, that child, was always giving and never getting back any kind of anything from their parents, any kind of emotional connection from their parents. And so they learned to give always to the detriment of themselves. And so in relationships later on, they would end up being like people pleasers. But if you reject them, their partners reject them for whatever reason, they can become very vicious and really malicious and do a lot of stuff that's really not nice. So the thing with a fearful avoidant, though, is that when you meet them first, they'll be very warm and they're really actively looking for a relationship. They'll be very warm and really want to please you, right? Until or unless you reject them, and then they can become vicious and do things that are not really nice. And the dismissive avoidant now, basically they learn not to trust emotional connections, and so they don't get emotionally connected to anyone. They don't get emotional because they learned in their childhood from their caregivers that they could not depend on them to be there for them. They could not depend on them to love them and care for them, and there was an inconsistency in that kind of a care. And so they learned to protect themselves. Basically, they've learned to just not get emotionally connected. So the dismissive avoidant will just not get connected to you. And so if you're in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant, what will happen is that they will get really close, at the beginning, especially when they're dating you and just getting to know you. And then if something happens that make you really get very totally, so close that it feels really, really good for you, then they can't take it because they don't trust it will last, and they're protecting themselves, so they withdraw. They will disappear, or they may, if it's they may even just start a quarrel, find something to annoy you, that then there's some problem, and then you start having some kind of a quarrel, and then it's a good reason for them to just disappear, and they'll disappear for weeks or months, and then come back when they're, that thing is kind of out of their system, and then they now need more connection, and they come back. And so it's in these relationships, for both the fearful avoidant and the dismissive avoidant, there's always a kind of a back and forth kind of thing, up and down, on and off. You'll hear it in some relationships described as on and off, up and down, so the high highs when you feel really good, and then they're the low lows when they just disappear on you, or they remove their emotional connectivity to you, because they just cannot take emotional connection. They get overwhelmed, and so they cannot take it. And so as soon as that happens, especially for the dismissive avoidant, the difference though between the dismissive avoidant and the fearful avoidant is that when the dismissive avoidant goes, they really have no feelings. They don't really feel like they're hurting anyone. They just do it. They're kind of selfish that way, because they don't think that they're hurting you, and they really don't care, actually, the dismissive avoidance. But the fearful avoidance, they really don't want to hurt anyone, and they really care if they hurt somebody, so it really bothers them. The dismissive avoidants are very good with boundaries. As I said, there's always this invisible wall that beyond which you cannot go. But the fearful avoidants, they are really bad with boundaries, because remember, in their childhood they had no boundaries for their parents. Their caregivers. It's like their relationship was so enmeshed that it felt like they could not live without their parents, and their parents could not live without them. It's almost like they were one, and so very difficult relationship to be in, because then you feel every emotion that comes from the parent and the child. It was just like a emotional frenzy, being back and forth from both of them. They feel each other's emotions, and so it was as if they became one. There was no boundary at all, and this child would always be giving, and the parents would always be taking, and so they grew up, as I said, to be people pleasers, because they're always trying. They felt that when they pleased people, then they felt good, because they were doing something good for like they cared for their parents. But it was just a one-way street. The dismissive avoidant, the reason why they disconnected from their emotions in childhood was because they did it to protect themselves, because they just felt that it was better to just not get emotionally connected, because they couldn't trust it. So there's a lot of lack of trust with the dismissive avoidant. The same thing with the fearful avoidant, but the fearful avoidant is, they want that emotional connection, but they also need space. Both avoidance, the dismissive and the fearful, they need their space to kind of get out of that emotional soup and go on their own. They both need space to kind of like get rid of, I don't know, to kind of chill, out of that kind of any kind of emotional connections that they have. They cannot tolerate high intensity emotional connections. They cannot tolerate it. So guys, I hope that kind of give you some kind of idea of these two types of avoidant personalities. And it is important that you look for some of these signs when you're dating, because then it's the best time for you to kind of just realize that, is this person an avoidant personality? Any of the avoidant personalities are really difficult to live with or to have a relationship with. It's really difficult because there's always going to be a back and forth, on and off kind of thing, because of they cannot tolerate emotional intensities. So guys, this is Christine, your relationship and mindset mastery doctor and leverage for change. Please, if you've learned something from this video, please like and share it with someone who may benefit from it. And also please subscribe to my channel, so whenever there's a new video, you'll get a notification. So guys, have a great day. As a matter of fact, have a great weekend. And thanks again for listening. Take care. Bye.